Metro City Police Department falls into stunned silence as U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Maya Johnson enters with federal marshals, her cabinet-level authority unmistakable, while medical reports documenting Officer Garrett Blake's brutal assault against her 7-year-old sister are displayed for all to see. Blake's confident authority crumbles as he recognizes the critically injured child whose head he'd struck with his baton just 6 hours earlier, the same little girl he dismissed as just another kid from the hood who needs to learn respect. "Good afternoon, Officer Blake," Dr. Johnson announces, her voice carrying the full weight of federal medical authority throughout the packed police station. "I'm Dr. Maya Johnson, Surgeon General of the United States. Some of you may recognize my 7-year-old sister Amara, the second grader you struck in the head with your baton while she was walking home from school." Her eyes lock onto Blake, who has gone pale. "Officer Blake, I believe we need to discuss why you used deadly force against an unarmed 7-year-old child, and why you told witnesses that these kids need to be controlled before they become criminals." The gathered officers freeze in recognition. The officer who 6 hours ago had absolute power over a child now faces the surgeon general whose sister he brutalized, and federal charges are already filed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 12 hours earlier, 7-year-old Amara Johnson had been walking home from Riverside Elementary School, her small backpack decorated with unicorn stickers, bouncing with each step as she hummed a song learned in music class that afternoon. At 7, Amara represented childhood innocence in its purest form. Bright smile, curious mind, love of learning evident in her honor roll status despite her family's economic challenges, and trusting nature that assumed adults would protect rather than harm her. Her second-grade teacher, Ms. Jennifer Brooks, frequently praised Amara's kindness toward classmates and enthusiasm for reading, her academic potential unlimited if provided with resources and opportunities that poverty often prevented talented children from accessing. The Johnson family had faced significant challenges since Amara's father died 4 years earlier, leaving Mother Grace to raise 2 daughters alone while working multiple jobs to provide basic necessities in Riverside neighborhood where economic opportunity remained scarce. Dr. Maya Johnson, Amara's older sister by 23 years, had escaped poverty through academic excellence and unwavering determination. Her journey from Riverside Elementary to medical school to appointment as U.S. Surgeon General, representing rare achievement that inspired but couldn't protect her family from systematic inequality. At 30, Maya had been serving as Surgeon General for 18 months, her medical expertise and public health advocacy earning bipartisan respect, while her personal story embodied American promise that hard work and talent could overcome disadvantage. Her appointment had been historic, youngest surgeon general in modern history, first from Riverside neighborhood to achieve cabinet-level position, and powerful voice for health equity addressing disparities affecting communities like the one where Amara still lived. Maya's success had allowed her to provide financial support for their mother and Amara, but Washington responsibilities prevented frequent visits home despite her deep love for the little sister she'd helped raise during their father's illness. And after his death, Maya had to work in Washington helping lots of people. Amara would explain to classmates asking about her famous sister, "But she calls me every night and tells me she loves me." The 7-year-old's pride in her sister was matched by Maya's fierce protectiveness, their bonds strengthened by shared loss, and Maya's determination that Amara would have every opportunity that poverty had nearly denied both of them. Officer Garrett Blake had been patrolling Riverside neighborhood for 8 years, his approach to policing characterized by aggressive enforcement, particularly targeting youth whom he viewed as future criminals, requiring early intervention through intimidation and force. At 34, Blake's personnel file documented troubling patterns of excessive force complaints involving minors, his interactions with neighborhood children consistently demonstrating hostility rather than community protection that youth policing should emphasize. His philosophy reflected belief that aggressive early enforcement prevented future crime, his treatment of children as potential threats rather than vulnerable individuals, requiring protection, revealing fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate youth. Engagement Internal Affairs Reviews had examined multiple complaints about Blake's interactions with children without implementing meaningful discipline. Department culture treating aggressive youth enforcement as acceptable rather than recognizing violations of children's rights and community. Trust Police Chief Douglas Hartman had been managing community relations challenges, while Blake's aggressive approach continued despite complaints from parents, teachers, and community leaders who recognized that hostile police presence traumatized rather than protected children. Officer Blake's enforcement methods reflect proactive policing, preventing youth from developing criminal patterns. Hartman had defended during community meetings that failed to address systematic abuse, affecting neighborhood children. The institutional tolerance for Blake's aggressive youth enforcement had created an environment where children feared police encounters that should have provided safety. Their developmental years shaped by systematic hostility from authority figures. Amara's walk home from school had been routine. 3 blocks through familiar neighborhood where she knew store owners, crossed streets carefully as her mother taught her, and looked forward to afternoon snack while waiting for Grace to return from her first job. The route included passing corner store owned by Mr. Hassan Ali, whose friendly greetings and occasional free candy made the walk feel safe and community-oriented, rather than threatening or isolated. What Amara couldn't have anticipated was that Blake's patrol would intersect with her innocent walk home, his aggressive enforcement approach about to transform routine childhood activity into trauma that would devastate her family and catalyze national reckoning. With police violence against children, Blake had been responding to unrelated call when he observed Amara walking alone, her small size and solitary status triggering his suspicious assessment rather than protective concern that child welfare should have prompted from law enforcement. Federal oversight systems had been monitoring patterns of police violence against minors, but individual cases hadn't yet triggered comprehensive intervention that Amara's assault would catalyze through her sister's unprecedented federal authority. As Amara walked past the corner store with innocent 7-year-old focus on getting home for snack and homework, she had no awareness that the next 5 minutes would transform her from carefree child into victim of police brutality that would shock the nation. The little girl who trusted that adults would protect her was about to experience violence that would challenge everything she'd been taught about safety, authority, and the fundamental assumption that children were sacred and inviolable. Her sister's position as Surgeon General would eventually ensure accountability, but nothing could undo the trauma that Blake's violence was about to inflict on innocent child whose only crime was walking home from school while black. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Officer Garrett Blake approached 7-year-old Amara Johnson with aggressive posture completely inappropriate for interaction with young child walking home from school in her own neighborhood during daylight hours. "Hey, where are you going?" Blake demanded without introduction or friendly tone, his immediate hostility transforming routine police presence into threatening encounter that terrified rather than reassured the small child. Amara stopped walking and looked up at the large officer with confusion, mixed with the obedience children are taught regarding police authority. "I'm walking home from school, sir. I live 3 blocks that way." Her polite response, providing clear explanation, should have ended the encounter. But Blake's predetermined suspicion escalated rather than resolved. "You're pretty young to be walking alone. Where are your parents?" The question revealed assumption of neglect or parental irresponsibility rather than recognizing that many working families relied on older elementary students to walk familiar routes independently. "My mama is at work," Amara explained honestly. "I walk home every day after school. My teacher knows, and Mr. Ali watches me go past his store." Her reasonable explanation documenting supervised independence should have satisfied any legitimate concern, but Blake interpreted her calm responses as suspicious rather than appropriate. "What's in your backpack?" Blake demanded, his tone suggesting criminal suspicion regarding 7-year-old's school supplies. Amara's confusion was evident. "My homework and my books." "I have reading practice tonight." Blake grabbed her small backpack without consent, his physical contact already exceeding appropriate interaction with minor child who had violated no law and posed no threat. Store owner Hassan Ali emerged from his shop, recognizing problematic interaction. "Officer Blake, that's Amara Johnson. She walks home every day after school. She's a good kid who never causes any problems." Blake's response to community testimony revealed systematic hostility. "Sir, I don't need neighborhood input about police procedures. I'm assessing potential truancy and determining appropriate parental notification." The fabricated concern about truancy for child walking home after school hours demonstrated pretextual justification for harassment lacking any legitimate basis. Teenager Marcus Wilson, walking home from high school, began recording on his phone as he recognized escalating situation. "Officer Blake is harassing little Amara for no reason. She's just walking home from school like she does every day." Blake noticed the recording and his aggression intensified. "Turn that phone off immediately." Recording police interactions with minors violates privacy laws. The false claim about recording legality while attempting to prevent documentation revealed consciousness that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially criminal. Amara began crying as Blake's hostile presence and physical handling of her backpack triggered fear. "Please, I want to go home. I didn't do anything wrong." Her tears and obvious distress should have prompted de-escalation and compassionate response to frightened child. But Blake interpreted her emotional reaction as resistance. "Stop crying and calm down," Blake commanded harshly. "Your behavior is making this situation worse." The victim blaming of 7-year-old child for responding with normal fear to aggressive adult. Authority demonstrated fundamental failure of appropriate youth interaction. Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, witnessing from across the street, called 911 to report officer misconduct. Police officer is harassing small child walking home from school. The little girl is crying and scared. This is wrong. Her emergency call would create official record but wouldn't prevent the violence that followed. When Amara tried to step back from Blake's aggressive proximity, seeking distance from threat as survival instinct prompted, Blake interpreted the movement as flight requiring forceful restraint. "Don't you run from me!" Blake shouted while grabbing Amara's small arm with force completely disproportionate to interaction with young child. Amara pulled away instinctively, her 7-year-old understanding, recognizing that the officer was hurting and scaring her, despite adult teachings about police as helpers and protectors. Blake drew his baton with shocking escalation, the weapon's appearance transforming harassment into imminent deadly threat against unarmed elementary school child. "Officer Blake, no! She's just a baby!" Mr. Ali shouted while running toward them, his protective instinct overriding personal safety concerns. But Blake's rage at perceived disrespect from child who had simply tried to create space from frightening adult culminated in violence that witnesses would describe as unimaginable. Brutality. Blake struck Amara's head with his baton with full force, the impact sending the tiny child to the pavement where she lay motionless. Blood pooling from the head wound as witnesses screamed in horror, "Oh my God, he hit that baby in the head." Marcus's recording captured along with multiple witnesses' traumatized reactions. "Somebody call an ambulance. That little girl isn't moving." Blake stood over Amara's unconscious body with baton still raised, his initial shock at what he'd done quickly replaced by defensive justification. Subject was resisting and attempting to flee. I used necessary force to establish control. The characterization of 7-year-old child's fear response as resisting requiring baton strike to the head demonstrated incomprehensible failure of judgment. Training and basic humanity. Mr. Ali reached Amara and cradled her bleeding head. "She's not breathing right." "Amara, baby, stay with us." Multiple 911 calls flooded emergency dispatch. "Officer just beat a little girl with his baton." "There's a child bleeding on Riverside Avenue." "Police attacked a second grader walking home from school." As emergency services rushed to the scene and witnesses provided aid to the critically injured child, the full horror of Blake's violence began settling over the community that would soon learn that Amara's sister possessed federal authority to ensure comprehensive accountability. The immediate aftermath of Officer Blake's brutal assault on 7-year-old Amara Johnson escalated from shocking violence into institutional crisis as emergency. Medical services arrived to find critically injured child while witnesses documented systematic attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Paramedics assessed Amara's injuries with obvious horror. Severe head trauma, unconscious, critical vital signs, potential skull fracture, and neurological damage requiring immediate transport to Pediatric Trauma Center. "We need emergency airlift to Metro City Children's Hospital," lead paramedic stated. "This child has life-threatening head injuries requiring immediate neurosurgical intervention." The medical assessment documented severity that Blake's defensive justifications couldn't minimize. This wasn't minor injury from reasonable force, but potentially fatal trauma from excessive violence against small child. Blake attempted to control the narrative while paramedics worked to stabilize Amara. Subject became aggressive and physically resistant, requiring intervention to prevent escalation and ensure officer safety during legitimate law enforcement. His fabricated account contradicted multiple witness testimonies and video documentation showing that Amara had been walking peacefully until Blake's harassment triggered her fear response. Captain Robert Finley arrived as supervising officer, immediately recognizing unprecedented crisis. "Blake, what happened here? Why is there a 7-year-old child being airlifted with critical head injuries?" Blake's response revealed defensive narrative construction. "Captain, subject was unaccompanied minor, exhibiting suspicious behavior. When I attempted to investigate potential truancy and parental neglect, subject became physically resistant, requiring force to establish control." The systematic lying about circumstances demonstrated consciousness of wrongdoing and institutional training in covering excessive force through administrative justifications. Mr. Ali provided contradictory testimony. "Captain Finley, that's completely false. Amara was walking home from school like she does every day. Officer Blake harassed her without cause, grabbed her, and when she got scared and stepped back, he hit her in the head with his baton." Multiple witnesses corroborated Ali's account. "The officer attacked that baby for no reason. She was just trying to get away from him. He hit her so hard she immediately collapsed." Marcus Wilson presented his phone recording. "Captain, I have video of everything. Officer Blake harassed Amara, grabbed her, and struck her with his baton when she pulled away. This is assault on a child." The video evidence would prove crucial, but institutional response patterns suggested administrative protection might attempt to justify the violence through procedural claims. Mrs. Grace Johnson arrived after receiving emergency call. Her screams upon seeing her daughter's blood on the pavement creating sound that witnesses would describe as haunting. "What did you do to my baby? Amara, oh God, what did you do to my child?" Her maternal anguish represented every parent's nightmare. Sending child to school in morning and receiving emergency call about police violence by afternoon. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Finley. Your daughter had an encounter with Officer Blake that resulted in injury. She's being transported to Children's Hospital for medical evaluation." the administrative language minimizing the assault enraged witnesses. "Encounter? He beat her with a baton," Grace screamed. "My 7-year-old daughter was walking home from school, and your officer attacked her." Pastor David Johnson arrived to support his sister-in-law while documenting institutional response. Captain Finley, multiple witnesses and video evidence show Officer Blake brutally assaulted an unarmed child. This requires immediate arrest for assault and attempted murder, not administrative review. Finley's response revealed institutional protection instinct. "Pastor Johnson, we're conducting thorough investigation to determine appropriate response. Officer Blake is being placed on administrative leave pending review of circumstances." The administrative leave, rather than immediate arrest for violent assault against child, demonstrated exactly the institutional tolerance that enabled police violence through protection of officers rather than accountability. Lieutenant Gerald Morrison arrived as additional supervision, his immediate concern about department liability rather than child welfare, revealing institutional priorities. "Captain, has legal counsel been notified? We need to manage media response and ensure proper documentation protects department interests." The focus on liability management rather than victim care demonstrated systematic prioritization of institutional protection over justice or accountability. Officer Janet Pierce, who had not witnessed the assault but arrived afterward, privately expressed horror to colleagues. "Blake hit a 7-year-old in the head with a baton. That's not law enforcement, that's child abuse." Her recognition of obvious criminality suggested that not all officers would participate in institutional cover-up, but speaking publicly would require courage to challenge department culture. Grace Johnson demanded immediate arrest. "That officer tried to kill my daughter. Why isn't he in handcuffs? If I hit someone's child with a weapon, I'd be arrested immediately." Her accurate observation highlighted double standard where civilian violence faced immediate prosecution while police violence against children received administrative review protecting perpetrators. As Amara was airlifted to trauma center with uncertain prognosis and community rage built over assault that violated every standard of appropriate force and child protection, none of the assembled officers yet knew that the critically injured child's sister possessed federal authority that would transform local police violence into national crisis, requiring comprehensive accountability. The institutional protection mechanisms that historically shielded violent officers from prosecution were about to confront unprecedented federal authority demanding justice for brutalized child whose only crime had been walking home from school while black. While Officer Blake's assault on 7-year-old Amara Johnson unfolded in Riverside neighborhood, parallel developments at the highest levels of federal government were creating unprecedented institutional response that would transform routine police violence into cabinet-level crisis requiring immediate intervention. U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Maya Johnson was concluding public health briefing at Department of Health and Human Services when her personal phone began receiving emergency notifications from family members in Metro City. The messages created immediate alarm. "Maya, Amara's been hurt by police. Your sister was attacked by cop and airlifted to hospital. Amara in critical condition. Come home immediately." Dr. Johnson's professional composure collapsed as maternal instinct toward her baby sister overwhelmed cabinet-level responsibilities. "I need immediate transport to Metro City. My 7-year-old sister has been critically injured. Clear my schedule and notify the White House." Her Surgeon General authority provided resources that typical families couldn't access: federal transportation, immediate security detail, and institutional power to demand comprehensive response. White House Chief of Staff received notification about cabinet members' family emergency. Surgeon General Johnson's minor sister has been critically injured in Metro City. Dr. Johnson is traveling immediately to be with family. Presidential awareness ensured that highest levels of federal government would be monitoring situation that would soon reveal itself as police violence rather than accident. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division maintained automated monitoring of police violence incidents involving minors, Amara's case triggering immediate alert. 7-year-old child critically injured by police Baton strike to head in Metro City. Severity and victim age warrant immediate federal inquiry. Federal oversight systems were independently identifying the assault as requiring investigation before anyone realized the victim's family connection to cabinet-level authority. Attorney General Patricia Webb received briefing during routine security update. Madam Attorney General, we have critical police violence incident involving minor child with potential federal civil rights implications. The Attorney General's awareness ensured that federal prosecution mechanisms were preparing response that would soon become top-level priority once family connection was revealed. Social media documentation of the assault had begun spreading. Virally, the video of Blake striking Amara creating immediate national outrage. Police officer hits 7-year-old girl in head with baton. Child walking home from school, attacked by cop. This baby is in critical condition because officer decided she was suspicious. The social media amplification was creating public accountability pressure that administrative protection historically relied on avoiding through limited publicity. Congressional Black Caucus staff monitoring police violence against children identified Amara's case through media reports. Another black child brutalized by police. This 7-year-old was walking home from school when officer attacked her with Baton. Legislative attention was building that would intensify once lawmakers learned of Surgeon General connection. Metro City Children's Hospital received incoming trauma case with medical priority reflecting life-threatening injuries. 7-year-old, female, blunt force head trauma from police baton, critical condition, possible skull fracture and intracranial bleeding. Pediatric neurosurgeon Dr. Helen Carter prepared emergency operating room. This child has suffered devastating head injury. We're talking about potential permanent brain damage or death from this level of trauma. Medical assessment documented. Severity that no administrative justification could excuse. This was attempted murder of child through deadly force. Dr. Johnson's federal security detail coordinated with local authorities during emergency transport. Surgeon General en route to Metro City for family emergency. Require immediate hospital access and security protocols. Federal presence would soon transform local police violence into unprecedented institutional crisis. Meanwhile, community organizing was mobilizing rapid response. Reverend Samuel Wright contacted civil rights organizations, Beverly Thompson activated police accountability networks, and Jerome Lewis coordinated legal advocacy for the Johnson family. Amara Johnson is 7 years old and fighting for her life because police officer decided she looked suspicious walking home from school. Community leaders stated during emergency gathering, this requires comprehensive federal accountability. National civil rights organizations were preparing institutional response. Police violence against 7-year-old child represents systematic failure of training, oversight, and accountability. Federal prosecution is mandatory. Media outlets were pursuing the story aggressively, the shocking nature of Baton assault against elementary school child, creating national attention. How does trained police officer justify striking 7-year-old in head with weapon? What training permits this violence against children? Investigative journalism was building pressure for accountability that administrative protection would struggle to contain. FBI Civil Rights Division opened preliminary investigation based on severity and victim age. Baton strike to 7-year-old's head potentially constitutes excessive force and civil rights violation requiring federal criminal prosecution. Federal law enforcement mechanisms were mobilizing independent of political pressure. The case's facts alone warranting comprehensive investigation. As Grace Johnson sat in hospital waiting room while surgeons fought to save Amara's life, she had no knowledge that her older daughter's cabinet position was about to transform family tragedy into federal crisis, requiring accountability at unprecedented levels. The institutional power differential that typically protected violent officers from prosecution was about to confront federal executive authority demanding justice for brutalized child whose sister possessed resources to ensure that this time there would be no administrative protection or institutional cover-up. Dr. Maya Johnson arrived at Metro City Children's Hospital 6 hours after Officer Blake's assault. Her federal security detail and Surgeon General authority creating immediate transformation of what had been treated as routine police incident into cabinet-level federal crisis. The Surgeon General's motorcade arriving at Pediatric Trauma Center with federal agents immediately signaled to hospital administration and local authorities that this case involved unprecedented federal attention and institutional power. "I'm Dr. Maya Johnson, U.S. Surgeon General," she announced to hospital administrators with barely controlled fury. "I'm here for my sister Amara Johnson, the 7-year-old girl who was beaten by police officer with a baton. I want immediate briefing on her condition and access to treating physicians." The revelation that a critically injured child was Surgeon General's sister created shock among hospital staff and local authorities, who suddenly recognized that routine police violence had attracted highest levels of federal attention. Hospital CEO rushed to provide personal briefing. "Dr. Johnson, your sister is in emergency surgery for skull fracture and intracranial bleeding. Dr. Carter is performing neurosurgical intervention to relieve pressure and repair damage." Maya's medical expertise made the clinical information devastatingly clear. Her baby sister might not survive, and if she did, permanent brain damage was likely. "Who authorized the use of deadly force against my 7-year-old sister?" Maya demanded of police officials who had arrived, recognizing federal crisis. "What possible justification exists for striking an elementary school child in the head with a baton?" Her questions combined personal anguish with professional authority. Her cabinet position ensuring that answers would be demanded at highest institutional levels. Police Chief Hartman attempted administrative explanation. "Dr. Johnson, we're conducting comprehensive investigation of the incident. Officer Blake has been placed on administrative leave pending review of circumstances and use of force protocols." Maya's response was withering. "Chief Hartman, administrative leave is not arrest. My sister is fighting for her life because your officer used deadly force against unarmed child. I want federal prosecution, not internal review." Her demand for federal rather than local accountability eliminated any possibility that administrative protection would shield Blake from criminal prosecution. Federal Prosecutor Patricia Young arrived with Attorney General authorization. "Dr. Johnson, Department of Justice is opening federal civil rights investigation with highest priority. We will pursue criminal prosecution for assault and deprivation of rights under color of law." The federal prosecution commitment ensured accountability beyond local administrative procedures that historically protected violent officers. Dr. Johnson reviewed security camera and cell phone footage documenting Blake's assault. This video shows premeditated attack on frightened child. "Officer Blake harassed my sister without cause, grabbed her when she tried to leave, and struck her with deadly force when she pulled away in fear." Her medical and federal authority analyzing evidence ensured that no administrative narrative could minimize the obvious. Criminality Attorney General Webb called personally. to express federal commitment. Dr. Johnson, I've reviewed the case file. This assault on your sister represents unconscionable police violence that will receive maximum federal prosecution. Justice Department resources are at your disposal. Cabinet-level solidarity demonstrated that federal executive authority would ensure comprehensive accountability rather than typical local protection of violent officers. White House press secretary issued statement. President is aware of brutal assault on Surgeon General's sister and has directed Attorney General to ensure comprehensive federal prosecution. Violence against children by those sworn to protect them is unacceptable. Presidential attention elevated the case to national priority, requiring immediate and visible accountability. Dr. Johnson confronted Officer Blake directly when he was brought for federal questioning. Officer Blake, you struck my 7-year-old sister in the head with your baton because you decided she looked suspicious walking home from school. You nearly killed a second grader because your racism convinced you that black child represented threat. Her direct accusation of racial motivation combined personal anguish with federal authority demanding accountability. Blake's attempted justification revealed systematic bias. I didn't know she was Surgeon General's sister. The subject appeared to be unaccompanied minor exhibiting suspicious behavior requiring investigation. Maya's response was devastating. My sister's relationship to me is irrelevant. Every child deserves protection from violence. The fact that you would treat any 7-year-old as threat requiring deadly force reveals exactly the racism and incompetence requiring your prosecution. Federal charges were formally filed within 8 hours of Maya's arrival. Garrett Blake is charged with assault with deadly weapon on minor, deprivation of rights under color of law, excessive force causing bodily injury, and hate crimes. Federal prosecution will seek maximum sentence. The rapid federal response demonstrated how cabinet-level authority could bypass local administrative protection to ensure immediate criminal accountability. As neurosurgeon emerged from 6-hour operation, Maya faced devastating medical briefing. Amara survived surgery, but she has significant brain injury. Recovery will be long and uncertain, with high probability of permanent cognitive and physical disabilities. The medical prognosis transformed Blake's assault from temporary injury into life-altering trauma that would affect Amara's entire future. Maya's federal authority ensured justice would be pursued, but nothing could undo the violence that had stolen her baby sister's childhood and threatened her future. The transformation from local police incident to national crisis reached full impact as media coverage revealed Surgeon General connection, while comprehensive federal response demolished institutional protection that typically shielded violent officers from accountability. National headlines created immediate public awareness. U.S. Surgeon General's 7-year-old sister brutally beaten by police. Cabinet member's child sister fighting for life after officer's Baton attack. Federal prosecution of cop who struck Surgeon General's sister. The media attention created unprecedented scrutiny that administrative procedures alone could never generate, ensuring systematic rather than isolated response. Dr. Maya Johnson addressed nation during emergency press conference from hospital. Her Surgeon General authority combined with sister's advocacy, creating powerful accountability pressure. My sister Amara is 7 years old. She was walking home from school when Officer Blake decided she looked suspicious. He harassed her, grabbed her, and when she became frightened and pulled away, he struck her in the head with his baton with enough force to fracture her skull. Her clinical medical description of injuries combined with personal anguish created devastating public documentation that administrative language typically obscured. Amara may never fully recover from this assault, Maya continued. She faces months of rehabilitation and potential permanent brain damage because police officer treated 7-year-old black child as threat requiring deadly force. The medical prognosis transformed Blake's Violence from temporary incident into life-altering trauma with permanent consequences. Video footage played continuously across news networks. Blake harassing Amara, grabbing her arm and striking her head with baton, followed by the child's collapse and witnesses' horrified reactions. This is what police violence against children looks like, media commentary emphasized. 7-year-old walking home from school, treated as criminal suspect, then brutalized when fear caused her to seek distance from aggressor. Public outrage reached levels rarely seen even in cases of police violence. The victim's age and innocence creating universal condemnation that transcended typical political divisions. Officer Blake's attempt to justify assault during federal interrogation revealed systematic racial bias. I observed unaccompanied minor in area known for juvenile delinquency. Subject's demeanor suggested potential criminal activity or truancy requiring investigation. Federal prosecutors used his own words to demonstrate discriminatory profiling. Officer Blake admits he assumed 7-year-old black girl walking home from school represented criminal threat. This is textbook racial profiling resulting in near-fatal assault. Police Chief Hartman faced immediate termination. Chief Hartman's leadership enabled Officer Blake's violence through inadequate training, supervision, and accountability. His removal is necessary for institutional reform. Leadership accountability demonstrated that federal intervention addressed systematic failures rather than treating Blake as isolated bad actor. Metro City Police Department was placed under comprehensive federal consent decree. Systematic failures in use of force policies, youth interaction protocols, and accountability mechanisms require federal oversight, ensuring protection of children and constitutional compliance. The institutional intervention ensured sustained reform rather than temporary administrative response. Department of Justice announced expanded investigation. Blake's personnel file reveals pattern of excessive force complaints, particularly involving minors. Federal investigation examines whether systematic civil rights violations require prosecution beyond individual case. The broader inquiry demonstrated that Amara's assault represented systematic pattern requiring comprehensive federal accountability. Congressional Black Caucus demanded immediate hearings. Police violence against 7-year-old child while walking home from school represents crisis requiring legislative response and oversight of law enforcement youth interaction protocols. Legislative attention ensured political accountability, complementing federal prosecution and departmental reform. Civil rights organizations mobilized national response. Amara Johnson's assault represents systematic problem affecting black children who face police violence at rates far exceeding other demographics. Federal reform must protect all children, not just Surgeon General's sister. Advocacy framework emphasized that accountability must serve universal protection rather than privileged access to justice. Amara's teacher, Ms. Brooks, provided testimony. About her student, Amara is kind, bright, enthusiastic 7-year-old who loves reading and helps classmates. She's exactly the type of child every adult should want to protect, not brutalize. Character testimony humanized victim beyond medical reports and legal proceedings, emphasizing the childhood innocence that Blake's violence had devastated. Community vigil outside hospital drew thousands. Justice for Amara. Protect our children from police violence. 7 years old and fighting for her life. Public solidarity demonstrated that outrage extended beyond individual case to systematic problem requiring comprehensive reform. Blake's bail was denied despite defense arguments. Defendant used deadly force against 7-year-old child without justification. Danger to community and flight risk require pre-trial detention. Federal detention ensured Blake couldn't continue. threatening children, while demonstrating that his violence carried serious consequences. As medical updates revealed Amara's slow recovery with significant deficits, the full impact of Blake's assault became clear: permanent disability that would affect her education, development, and life opportunities. Maya's anguish was visible. "My sister survived, but the bright, active child she was may be lost forever because police officer decided 7-year-old black girl represented threat." The personal and professional authority Maya wielded had ensured swift justice, but it couldn't restore her sister's stolen childhood or erase the trauma that would affect Amara's entire future. The power shift was complete. Police violence that might have been administratively dismissed had instead triggered comprehensive federal accountability, but the victory felt hollow while Amara lay in hospital facing uncertain future. Within 3 weeks of Officer Blake's assault on Amara Johnson, comprehensive federal prosecution and institutional reform transformed police violence against children from administratively tolerated practice into federal priority, requiring maximum accountability and systematic prevention. Department of Justice secured federal grand jury indictment with unusual speed. Garrett Blake faces federal charges for assault with deadly weapon on minor, deprivation of rights under color of law, excessive force causing severe bodily injury, and hate crimes. Evidence of racial motivation and targeting of vulnerable child supports maximum prosecution. The comprehensive federal charges ensured accountability beyond local administrative processes that historically protected violent officers. Federal trial proceeded with overwhelming evidence, video documentation, medical testimony about life-altering injuries, witness accounts of unprovoked violence, and Blake's own statements revealing racial bias motivating the assault. Jury deliberated 90 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all charges, the brevity reflecting obvious criminality that no defense could justify. Evidence showed systematic racial profiling followed by deadly force against unarmed 7-year-old. Defendant's guilt is beyond any reasonable doubt. Federal Judge Victoria Lawrence imposed 35-year prison sentence during emotional proceedings. Garrett Blake, you used deadly force against 7-year-old child walking home from school. Your assault has caused permanent brain injury, affecting every aspect of her future. Maximum sentence is necessary to acknowledge the devastating harm you caused and deter similar violence against children. The substantial federal sentence established precedent that violence against children by police carried consequences approaching those for civilians who committed identical assaults. Civil rights settlement included $15.2 million compensatory damages plus lifetime medical care funding. Financial compensation addresses Amara's ongoing needs and lost opportunities, though no amount can restore the childhood stolen by police violence. The settlement ensured Amara would receive comprehensive care for disabilities that would require decades of support. Police Chief Hartman's termination was followed by federal investigation of his supervisory failures. Chief Hartman enabled Blake's violence through inadequate training and accountability. His removal addresses leadership failures that endangered children. Administrative accountability demonstrated that institutional reform required addressing supervisory personnel who enabled rather than prevented systematic violence. Metro City Police Department underwent complete restructuring under federal consent decree. Independent civilian oversight with child protection focus, mandatory de-escalation training, prohibition on force against non-threatening minors, specialized youth, interaction units, and body camera requirements preventing evidence destruction. Federal oversight continues until Metro City PD demonstrates sustained constitutional compliance protecting children, DOJ monitors announced. Department-wide policy changes prohibited weapons deployment during interactions with elementary age. Children except in extreme circumstances requiring supervisory approval. 7-year-olds don't represent threats requiring baton strikes. Policies must reflect that children deserve protection rather than force. Use of force standards specific to youth interactions addressed systematic training failures that had treated children as potential threats. Dr. Maya Johnson established National Commission on Police Violence Against Children. Her Surgeon General authority combined with personal experience, creating powerful advocacy platform. Federal data shows black children face police violence at rates far exceeding other demographics. Systematic reform must protect all children regardless of family connections. Her advocacy emphasized universal protection rather than privileged justice, though acknowledging her position had enabled swift accountability. Congressional legislation, named Amara's Law, established federal standards for police interactions with minors, mandatory de-escalation, prohibition on force against non-threatening children, independent investigation of youth violence, and federal prosecution authority when local accountability fails. Amara Johnson's assault catalyzed recognition that children deserve special protection from those wielding state authority, legislative sponsors explained. Officer training programs nationwide incorporated case study examining Blake's assault. This case demonstrates catastrophic failure of judgment, training, and basic humanity. Every aspect represents what officers must never do when interacting with children. Educational reform ensured Blake's violence would serve as cautionary example, preventing similar assaults through systematic training, addressing racial bias, and appropriate youth engagement. Community oversight boards with youth representatives ensured policies reflected children's experiences and needs. Student voice in police accountability ensures practices serve rather than threaten those most vulnerable to abuse. Amara's recovery continued with intensive rehabilitation, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and special education support addressing cognitive deficits from traumatic brain injury. Maya's medical expertise ensured comprehensive care, while her public zoo updates maintained attention on systematic problems. Amara is learning to walk again and struggling with memory and processing speed. 7-year-olds should be worried about spelling tests, not relearning basic skills. Medical documentation of ongoing impact prevented public attention from fading once initial outrage subsided. Teacher Ms. Brooks adapted curriculum supporting Amara's return to school. Amara's enthusiasm for learning persists despite her disabilities. Her resilience inspires everyone, but she shouldn't have needed it. Educational accommodation addressed immediate needs while documenting long-term academic impact. Data analysis 18 months after assault showed measurable impact. Police violence against minors in Metro City decreased 89%. Use of force incidents involving children under 12 dropped to near zero, and community trust in reformed police practices showed modest improvement. Numbers represent children protected from violence that Amara experienced, federal monitors reported, but systematic cultural change requires sustained commitment beyond initial policy implementation. National Police Accountability Coalition recognized Amara's case as catalyst for comprehensive youth protection reform. Officer Blake's assault on 7-year-old child exposed systematic failures requiring federal intervention. Amara's family's advocacy has protected countless children through reforms her suffering inspired. Advocacy organizations ensured sustained pressure beyond immediate prosecution and settlement, demanding ongoing accountability for children's safety. Amara's mother, Grace Johnson, became powerful advocate for families affected by police violence. I sent my 7-year-old to school and got call that police officer beat her with baton. No parent should experience that terror. Systematic reform must ensure officers protect rather than brutalize our children. Her maternal perspective provided crucial voice emphasizing family impact beyond legal and policy discussions. Psychological support programs expanded to address trauma affecting children who witnessed police violence. Amara's classmates and neighborhood children experienced secondary trauma from witnessing assault on peer. Community healing requires addressing collective impact. Mental health resources acknowledged that police violence traumatized entire communities beyond direct victims. Blake's conviction was upheld on appeal, defense arguments about split-second decisions and qualified immunity rejected. 35-year sentence is appropriate for officer who used deadly force against 7-year-old child. No legal doctrine protects such egregious constitutional violations. Appellate affirmation ensured Blake's accountability couldn't be reversed through legal technicalities. Police union contract reforms addressed provisions that had protected violent officers. Previous agreements prioritized officer protection over accountability. Revised contracts balanced legitimate labor rights with community safety and children's protection. Labor agreement changes ensured institutional reforms couldn't be undermined through collective bargaining, protecting violent personnel. Medical research Dr. Johnson Commission documented long-term impacts of police violence on child development. Children who experience police violence suffer PTSD, academic decline, developmental delays, and lasting distrust of authority. Prevention serves both individual well-being and societal health. Scientific evidence provided foundation for policies prioritizing children's protection from institutional violence. International attention elevated American police violence against children to human rights concern. Amara Johnson's assault represents systematic problem affecting vulnerable populations. International standards require protecting children from state violence. Global scrutiny created additional pressure for sustained reform beyond domestic political considerations. Amara's recovery allowed her to address children at community events. Her courage, despite disabilities, inspiring others. I was scared when the police officer hurt me. But my sister Maya and lots of people helped me get better. Kids should be safe from people who are supposed to protect us. Her simple testimony provided moral clarity that complex legal arguments couldn't match. Pastor David Johnson led community healing services addressing spiritual trauma. Police violence against innocent child represents moral crisis requiring communal response. Faith communities must demand justice while supporting affected families. Religious leadership provided healing context, complementing legal and policy responses. Grandmother Rose Johnson's advocacy for elder perspective. I raised Maya and helped raise Amara. Watching Blake nearly kill my grandbaby while she walked home from school broke something in our community. But seeing Maya use her position to demand justice gave us hope that power can serve rather than abuse us. Multi-generational family perspective demonstrated how police violence affected entire family systems across time. Federal funding supported youth police liaison programs, emphasizing positive relationships. Children need to see police as protectors rather than threats. Rebuilding trust requires consistent positive interactions, replacing traumatic encounters. Preventive programs addressed relationship repair beyond reactive accountability for violence. 2 years after the assault, Amara had made remarkable recovery despite permanent disabilities. Amara functions well with accommodations, but testing reveals lasting cognitive deficits affecting processing speed, executive function, and memory. She will require ongoing support throughout her education and life. Medical documentation ensured accountability reflected lifelong rather than temporary impact. Maya balanced Surgeon General duties with advocacy and family support. Professional responsibilities continue, but Amara's needs remain priority. Federal position enables advocacy that typical families can't access, creating obligation to demand systematic protection for all children. Her integration of personal and professional roles demonstrated how individual tragedy could catalyze institutional change when combined with positional authority. The accountability process demonstrated that comprehensive response to police violence against children required criminal prosecution, civil compensation, institutional reform, community healing, legislative action, and sustained oversight ensuring cultural transformation protecting vulnerable populations. Blake's incarceration and substantial reforms provided justice, but Amara's stolen childhood and permanent disabilities represented irreversible harm that no accountability could fully address. Over the following 36 months, the transformation, catalyzed by Officer Blake's assault on 7-year-old Amara Johnson, evolved from Metro City-specific reforms into national movement, addressing systematic police violence against children that had affected vulnerable youth, while institutional tolerance prevented adequate protection. The Children's Protection from Police Violence Act, inspired directly by Amara's case, established federal standards prohibiting force against non-threatening minors, mandatory de-escalation with children under 12, independent investigation of youth violence, specialized training for child interactions, and federal prosecution authority for systematic violations. Amara Johnson's assault demonstrated catastrophic failure when police treat children as threats, congressional sponsors explained during legislative debate. Federal standards ensure systematic protection rather than depending on local accountability that historically failed vulnerable youth. The legislative framework ensured federal resources would support children facing police violence, while establishing accountability mechanisms that local processes couldn't provide. Dr. Maya Johnson became national voice for police reform while continuing Surgeon General duties. My position enabled swift justice for Amara, but every child deserves equal protection from violence. Federal authority must prioritize the most vulnerable rather than only responding when cabinet families are affected. Her advocacy emphasized universal protection while acknowledging privilege her position provided. National Youth Safety Commission, with child representatives established oversight, ensuring policies reflected children's experiences. Adults create policies affecting children without consulting them. Youth voice in police accountability ensures practices serve rather than threaten those most vulnerable. Participatory governance included young people whose lived experience informed effective rather than theoretical reforms. Mandatory training. Addressing child development and age-appropriate responses became federal requirement. Officers must understand that 7-year-olds' fear response to authority isn't resistance requiring force. Developmental knowledge prevents treating normal childhood behavior as threat. Educational requirements addressed fundamental knowledge gaps that had enabled Blake's violence through misunderstanding child psychology. Community policing models. Emphasizing relationship building replaced aggressive enforcement in schools and neighborhoods. Children need to see police as helpers rather than threats. Positive interactions build trust that aggressive enforcement destroys. Preventive relationship development addressed cultural problems beyond reactive accountability for violence. Body camera requirements with severe penalties for deactivation. During youth interactions, ensured documentation. Video evidence was crucial for prosecuting Blake. Comprehensive recording protects both children and officers from false claims while ensuring accountability. Technology mandates prevented evidence destruction that had historically protected violent officers. Independent civilian oversight boards with child welfare expertise investigated youth violence. Police departments investigating themselves creates conflict of interest. Independent review with child protection focus ensures appropriate rather than defensive responses. Structural reforms addressed institutional bias, protecting officers rather than vulnerable children. Psychological screening and ongoing mental health evaluation for officers identified those unsuitable for youth interaction. Blake's personnel. File revealed concerning patterns that should have prevented child contact. Comprehensive screening protects children from officers with demonstrated bias or violence. Preventive identification addressed systematic hiring and retention failures that had enabled violent officers. Restorative justice programs brought together, affected children, families, and reformed officers. Dialogue allows healing while educating officers about lasting harm their violence causes. Understanding human impact prevents normalization of force against vulnerable populations. Alternative accountability approaches addressed both individual healing and cultural transformation. Research documenting disproportionate impact on Black children validated community experiences. Data confirms systematic racial disparities in police youth violence. Black children face force at rates far exceeding other demographics, even controlling for behavior and circumstances. Evidence-based analysis provided foundation for policies addressing documented rather than assumed problems. Federal funding supported community-based youth programs providing alternatives to police contact. Many situations involving children don't require law enforcement. Trained social workers, counselors, and educators address needs without criminalizing normal childhood behavior. Resource allocation shifted toward preventive support rather than reactive enforcement. Amara's continued recovery and adaptation inspired nationwide advocacy. Amara's resilience despite permanent disabilities demonstrates children's strength, but also underscores harm that violence causes. Her courage pursuing normal childhood, despite obstacles, challenges all of us to demand better protection. Personal narrative maintained public attention on systematic problems beyond initial crisis. 3 years after assault, comprehensive data demonstrated measurable transformation. Police violence against children under 12 decreased 73% nationally. Fatal force incidents involving young children dropped to near zero, and community reports of positive youth police interactions increased significantly. Numbers represent lives protected and childhoods preserved, federal monitors reported. But sustained reform requires ongoing vigilance, preventing backsliding toward practices that normalized violence against vulnerable youth. International human rights organizations recognized American reform as model addressing problems affecting many nations. Amara Johnson's case catalyzed transformation, showing that protecting children from state violence serves both individual rights and societal values, prioritizing youth well-being. Global attention elevated child protection from police violence to universal human rights standard. Maya's advocacy expanded beyond policing to broader child welfare. Police violence represents one dimension of systematic failures affecting vulnerable children. Comprehensive protection requires addressing poverty, education inequality, healthcare access, and all factors affecting youth well-being. Holistic approach connected police reform to broader social justice affecting children's life opportunities. Educational curricula incorporated children's rights and appropriate responses to authority. Teaching youth about constitutional protections and documenting misconduct empowers them to protect themselves while providing evidence for accountability. Civic education prepared children to navigate authority relationships while asserting legitimate rights. Community oversight ensured reforms persisted beyond initial federal attention. Local accountability prevents erosion of protections once national focus shifts. Sustained community power ensures police continue serving rather than threatening children. Grassroots infrastructure maintained pressure for ongoing rather than temporary compliance with protective standards. The systematic reforms demonstrated. The comprehensive transformation required criminal prosecution, legislative action, community power, educational reform, and sustained oversight, ensuring that children receive protection from violence that their vulnerability demanded and their humanity deserved. 5 years after Officer Garrett Blake struck 7-year-old Amara Johnson with his baton, the sisters stood together at the National Children's Rights Conference, Amara, now 12, and managing her disabilities with remarkable resilience, while Maya's Surgeon General advocacy had transformed child protection policy nationwide. 5 years ago, I was walking home from school when a police officer hurt me really bad. Amara addressed the audience with carefully practiced speech, reflecting cognitive accommodations. I almost died, and I still have trouble with some things because of my brain injury. But my sister Maya and lots of people helped make sure other kids are safer now. Her testimony combined personal vulnerability with pride in transformation her suffering had inspired. The courage required to publicly discuss her trauma, evident in her deliberate speech and visible effort. Dr. Maya Johnson, whose Surgeon General tenure had been defined by dual commitments to public health and police reform, reflected on the journey from personal tragedy to systematic change. Amara's assault exposed my privilege. My position enabled swift justice that most families can't access. Our work ensures every child receives protection regardless of whether their sister is cabinet member or their mother works 3 jobs to survive. Her acknowledgement of privilege combined with commitment to universal protection demonstrated understanding that individual justice required systematic transformation. Statistical evidence showed measurable national impact. Police violence against children under 12 had decreased 81%. Fatal force incidents involving young children had virtually disappeared, and community trust in reformed police practices had improved significantly, though remaining fragile. Numbers represent childhoods preserved and families spared the trauma we experienced, Maya emphasized. But Amara's permanent disabilities remind us that prevention matters more than accountability. No amount of justice restores what violence steals. Amara's recovery had been remarkable within the constraints of permanent brain injury. She attended middle school with special education support, participated in adaptive sports, maintained friendships, and demonstrated resilience that inspired everyone who knew her story. Amara functions well with accommodations, but standardized testing reveals persistent deficits affecting academic achievement and limiting future opportunities. Her special education teacher reported, "She'll never reach the potential she had before the assault." The honest assessment of lasting impact prevented romanticizing her recovery or minimizing Blake's lifelong destruction of her capabilities. Officer Blake remained in federal prison serving his 35-year sentence, his appeals exhausted, and his name synonymous with unconscionable police violence against children. Blake's conviction established precedent that deadly force against non-threatening children carries consequences approaching civilian standards. His incarceration provided justice while serving as deterrent for officers considering whether children warranted violent enforcement. Metro City Police Department had been transformed through sustained federal oversight. 5 years of comprehensive reform demonstrates systematic change is possible when federal authority demands accountability and communities maintain pressure, preventing backsliding. Institutional transformation validated that sustained rather than temporary intervention could alter police culture. Grace Johnson had become powerful advocate for families affected by police violence. "I'm still Amara's mother, working to support my family, but I also speak for parents who can't access microphones or federal authority. Every family deserves justice regardless of their connections. Her advocacy emphasized that systematic protection must serve all vulnerable families rather than only those with institutional access. Grandmother Rose Johnson's perspective acknowledged both progress and ongoing challenges. Amara survived and Blake faced justice, but our community still fears police who should protect us. Cultural transformation requires generations, not just policy changes. Multi-generational wisdom recognized that institutional reform couldn't immediately undo centuries of systematic violence and mistrust. Congressional Representative Linda Brown, who had sponsored Amara's law, reflected on legislative impact. Federal standards protect children that local accountability failed. But laws only work when enforced consistently, and communities maintain vigilance. Political perspective acknowledged that legislative victory required sustained implementation and oversight. Amara's relationship with Maya had deepened through shared advocacy. Maya is my sister and my hero. She used her important job to help me and other kids. I want to help kids too when I grow up. Sibling bond, strengthened through trauma, demonstrated how family support enabled resilience while inspiring continued commitment to protecting others. As the conference concluded with standing ovation, acknowledging both sisters' courage and the systematic transformation their experience had catalyzed, the journey from individual tragedy to national reform was complete yet ongoing. Most importantly, their advocacy emphasized that reform must continue. We've made progress protecting children from police violence, but systematic racism and poverty still endanger vulnerable youth. Protecting children requires addressing all threats to their well-being, not just police misconduct. The holistic approach connected police reform to broader social justice affecting children's safety and opportunities. Amara's closing message to the audience reflected wisdom beyond her years. Kids should be safe everywhere, at school, at home, and walking in their neighborhood. Grown-ups need to protect us, not hurt us. Thank you for helping make things better for kids like me. The standing ovation acknowledged not just their personal journey, but the thousands of children whose safety had been enhanced through reforms inspired by Amara's suffering and Maya's determined advocacy. 5 years after experiencing violence that nearly killed her, Amara had transformed from victim into advocate, demonstrating that trauma survivors could inspire change while acknowledging lasting harm that no reform could undo. Her permanent disabilities represented irreversible loss, but the systematic protections preventing other children from experiencing similar violence provided meaning to suffering that should never have occurred. The 7-year-old who had been brutalized while walking home from school, and the Surgeon General who had demanded comprehensive accountability, had together transformed American policing culture, proving that systematic reform could emerge from individual tragedy when positional authority, sustained advocacy, and community power converged to protect the most vulnerable members of society. Their legacy would be measured not in awards or recognition alone, but in the countless children who would grow up safer from police violence. Because one family refused to accept that brutality against 7-year-old was merely tragic accident rather than systematic failure, requiring comprehensive transformation. That journey, from individual assault to national movement, from administrative dismissal to federal accountability, from isolated incident to systematic reform, represented the kind of change that made both law enforcement and entire communities more just, more protective of children, and more faithful to principles, requiring that the most vulnerable among us receive the greatest protection from those wielding authority over their lives and futures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.